Be me, name is Graham. 34 years old, senior project manager at a creative marketing agency. Been here 6 years, love what I do. We create campaigns for brands, everything from social media to TV spots. Company has about 80 employees, mix of creatives, strategists, and account managers. The work is demanding but rewarding. Nothing beats seeing your campaign go viral, or watching a client sales spike because of something your team built. Our team was tight, 14 people across different backgrounds. Men, women, different races, different ages. Never really thought about it, honestly. We just worked well together, celebrated wins, supported each other through tough deadlines. Office felt like a second family. Cheesy but true. Then everything changed. Company decided we needed a formal DEI initiative. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wasn't against it in principle. Treating people fairly makes sense. Making sure everyone has opportunities makes sense. But the way it was implemented was a disaster. It started with Diane Foster, our HR director. 42 years old, been at the company 3 years. She was passionate about social causes. Always sharing articles about workplace equity, posting about representation and systemic issues. Good person, good intentions, but sometimes more focused on ideology than practicality. Diane announced at an all-hands meeting. The company was hiring a DEI consultant, someone to assess our culture and implement improvements. She was very excited about it, said this would transform our workplace, make us a model for the industry. I figured it would be some workshops and policy updates. Standard corporate stuff. How wrong I was. 2 weeks later, the consultant arrived. Her name was Keisha Monroe, 36. Introduced herself as a DEI strategist and cultural architect. Had a website full of buzzwords. Dismantling systemic oppression. Decolonizing workplace culture. Centering marginalized voices. Diane had found her through social media. Keisha had a big following, lots of engagement. Posted constantly about workplace racism and sexism. Diane was impressed by her passion. Didn't dig much deeper apparently. First red flag came during Keisha's introduction meeting. She talked for 45 minutes about her philosophy. Used terms like intersectional framework and privilege mapping. But when someone asked about her specific experience, she got vague. Said she'd worked with various organizations, helped them on their equity journeys. No names, no specifics, no measurable outcomes. Just vibes and vocabulary. I looked her up afterward. Her LinkedIn showed a lot of self-employment. No major corporate roles. Education was a bachelor's in communications. No certifications in organizational psychology or HR. No training credentials that I could find. Her expertise seemed to be having opinions on Twitter, not actually transforming workplace cultures. But Diane had already signed a 6-month contract. $15,000 per month plus expenses. We were committed. First month, Keisha did her assessment. Interviewed employees, reviewed policies, observed meetings. I had my session with her. She asked about my experience as a white male in the company. I said I didn't really think about it. I just did my job and worked with my team. She said that was part of the problem. Not thinking about my privilege was a form of privilege. I needed to interrogate my position in the hierarchy. I asked what that meant practically. She said it meant recognizing how my identity gave me advantages that others didn't have. I asked for specific examples at our company. She couldn't give any. Just spoke in generalities about systemic patterns. I left feeling confused and slightly accused, like I'd done something wrong by existing. Month 2, Keisha presented her findings, called them deeply concerning, said our company had significant equity gaps. Leadership was too white and too male. Our actual leadership was 60% women, but okay. She said client-facing roles were dominated by certain demographics. The creative team lacked diverse perspectives. Our creative team was actually pretty diverse, but whatever. She said employees from marginalized groups felt unheard, based on interviews she'd conducted. I wondered who said that because most people I knew were happy. Her recommendations were extensive. Mandatory bias training for all employees. Separate affinity groups for different identities. Revised hiring process with demographic targets. Review of all promotions through equity lens. Regular check-ins about microaggressions. New reporting system for equity concerns. Diane approved everything immediately. Didn't question any of it. Just said this is exactly what we need. Month 3, the initiatives launched. First was mandatory bias training. 4 hours on a Saturday, no exceptions. Keisha led the session personally. Started by having us acknowledge our privileges. Go around the room and state our identity categories. Then discuss how each one gave us advantages or disadvantages. White employees were told to acknowledge their racial privilege. Male employees were told to acknowledge their gender privilege. Straight employees were told to acknowledge their orientation privilege. It felt like a confession booth. Admitting sins we weren't sure we'd committed. The training continued with case studies. Every example showed white men as the problem. The interrupter in meetings was always male. The person making assumptions was always white. The one being victimized was always a woman or person of color. Just a simple narrative of oppressors and oppressed. I looked around during a break. The men looked defeated and resentful. The women looked uncomfortable too. This wasn't bringing us together. It was dividing us into categories, making us see each other as representatives of groups, not as individuals we'd worked with for years. After the training, things felt different. Conversations became careful, guarded. Men second-guessed every interaction with female colleagues. Afraid of being accused of something, people stopped joking around. The easy camaraderie we'd had was replaced by tension. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Month for the affinity groups launched. Separate meetings for different identity categories. Women's group, BIPOC group, LGBTQ group. White men weren't assigned to any group. Keisha said we didn't need support spaces. We already had the whole company as our space. I thought that was ironic. Creating inclusion by explicitly excluding one group. But I kept my mouth shut. The affinity groups created weird dynamics. Suddenly people were having meetings others couldn't attend, discussing things that affected the whole team, but only from one perspective. The women's group made recommendations about project assignments, without input from the men who'd be affected. The BIPOC group suggested changes to client relationships, without consulting the white employees who managed those accounts. Decisions were being made in silos, then presented as mandates. No discussion, no collaboration. Just comply or be seen as resistant to equity. Month 5 productivity started visibly dropping. Project timelines were slipping. Creative output was less innovative. Client feedback was getting worse. I tracked it because that's my job. We missed 3 deadlines in 1 month. Previously, we'd miss maybe 1 per quarter. Creative concepts were being rejected more often. Clients said our work felt safe and generic. I knew why. People were afraid to take risks, afraid that a bold idea might offend someone, might be seen as insensitive or problematic. Easier to play it safe. Submit boring work that nobody could criticize. Creativity requires freedom. We'd lost that freedom, replaced it with constant self-monitoring. One incident crystallized the problem. We were brainstorming for a fitness brand campaign. Someone suggested an edgy concept pushing physical limits. Keisha was observing the meeting. She interrupted to ask if we'd considered how that concept might exclude people with disabilities or reinforce harmful body image standards. The idea died immediately. Nobody wanted to defend it and risk being labeled insensitive. We ended up with a bland campaign about wellness journeys. Client was disappointed. Said it didn't stand out from competitors. They were right, it was forgettable. But it was safe. That's what we'd become. A safe, forgettable agency. Paralyzed by fear of saying the wrong thing. Month 5, Keisha implemented the microaggression reporting system. Anonymous submissions about problematic behavior. She reviewed all reports and determined appropriate responses. Suddenly, everyone was paranoid. Any interaction could be reported. Any comment could be interpreted as aggressive. A guy named Phil got called into HR. Someone reported he'd complimented a woman's presentation. Said she did a great job explaining the data. The complaint said he seemed surprised she understood data, implying he was sexist. Phil was devastated. He'd been genuinely impressed, meant it as pure praise. Now he had a file on him. He stopped giving any feedback to female colleagues. Too risky. Another guy named Trevor got reported. He'd asked a black colleague where he was from originally. Trying to make conversation, learned he was from Chicago. The report said it was a microaggression, implying he wasn't really American. Trevor had asked because he was also from the Midwest. Wanted to bond over shared regional background. Now he just didn't talk to that colleague at all. The system was creating silence. Not understanding, not connection. Just fear and withdrawal. I started documenting everything. Every incident, every dropped deadline, every client complaint. The pattern was undeniable. Performance declined exactly when Keisha's initiatives launched. Correlation was crystal clear. Month 6, the breaking point. We lost our biggest client, a luxury fashion brand we'd worked with for 4 years. They said our recent work lacked the edge they needed. Said our team seemed distracted and divided. Took their business to a competitor. That was $2 million in annual revenue.
Gone.
The same week, 3 employees resigned, all citing toxic work environment. Ironic since that's what Keisha was supposedly fixing. 2 were men who felt constantly blamed for existing. One was a woman who said she couldn't take the tension anymore. Said the team used to feel like family. Now it felt like a minefield. I requested a meeting with Diane. Brought my documentation. Productivity metrics, client feedback, resignation letters. Laid it all out. Showed the timeline of decline matching Keisha's initiatives. Diane was defensive at first. Said transformation was uncomfortable. Said resistance was expected. I said this wasn't resistance, it was results. We'd lost $2 million and 3 good employees. Morale was at rock bottom. Creative output was the worst in years. I asked what specific improvements Keisha had delivered. Diane couldn't name any. Just said we were on a journey. I said the journey was leading off a cliff. I also shared what I'd found about Keisha's background. Her lack of credentials, her vague experience claims. I'd done more digging. Found that 2 companies she claimed to have helped had never heard of her. Another had hired her for 1 workshop, then declined to continue. Diane looked troubled. Said she'd review the situation. Week later, there was an executive meeting. CEO had gotten involved after the client loss. They brought in an outside firm to audit Keisha's work. Real professionals with actual credentials. Organizational psychologists with corporate experience. Their findings were damning. Keisha's assessment methodology was flawed. Her recommendations weren't based on evidence. Her training materials were pulled from various internet sources. Some of it was actually counterproductive, creating division rather than inclusion. She had no measurable success metrics. No way to evaluate if anything was working. Just vibes and ideology. The audit also found discrepancies in her credentials. Some certifications she claimed didn't exist. Some organizations she cited had no record of her. She wasn't just unqualified. She'd misrepresented herself. Keisha was terminated immediately. Her contract voided for misrepresentation. Diane was put on performance improvement plan for failing to properly vet the hire. Company announced a reset of the DEI initiatives. Would be rebuilding with qualified professionals. Focus on practical improvements, not ideology. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon. I've never seen a workplace mood shift so fast. People were actually smiling again. Someone made a joke and others laughed. First genuine laughter I'd heard in months. The tension started evaporating. Like a fog lifting. Following weeks were about rebuilding. The affinity groups were dissolved, replaced by open forums anyone could attend. The microaggression reporting system was scrapped, replaced by standard HR complaint process. The bias training was discontinued, replaced by professional development that actually developed skills. People started talking normally again, collaborating without fear, taking creative risks. The safe, bland work gave way to bold ideas again. 3 months later, productivity was back to normal. 6 months later, it was higher than before Keisha arrived. We won 2 new major clients, rebuilt the revenue we'd lost. The people who'd resigned. One actually came back, said she heard things had changed, wanted to be part of the team again. New DEI approach was completely different. Company hired an actual organizational psychologist with real credentials and corporate experience. She focused on practical things, inclusive meeting practices that helped everyone contribute, mentorship programs matching people across different backgrounds, skills training that built actual capabilities, just practical improvements that made work better. For everyone. That's what good DEI looks like. Not ideology, not lectures, not pointing fingers. Just making the workplace better for all employees. Helping everyone succeed regardless of background. Year later, I got promoted to Director of Project Management. Diane had quietly left the company, found an opportunity elsewhere. I don't hold grudges, she meant well. Just got seduced by passion over competence. It's an easy trap. Someone speaks confidently about important issues. You assume they know what they're doing. But conviction isn't competence. Caring about something doesn't mean you can fix it. Good intentions need good execution. Otherwise, they just cause harm. With better branding. I think about the Keisha era sometimes. How quickly a good culture can be destroyed. How easily fear replaces trust. How ideology can override common sense. We lost a year of productivity. Lost millions in revenue. Lost good employees. All because someone with a social media following got hired to do a job she wasn't qualified for. And nobody questioned it. Because questioning DEI felt risky. Felt like you might be labeled a bigot. So everyone stayed quiet while the ship sank. That's the real lesson. Good causes can be hijacked by incompetent people. And fear of being called a bad person can silence legitimate concerns. Until the damage is undeniable. Real inclusion doesn't require guilt or blame. It requires treating people as individuals, helping everyone contribute their best, creating environments where talent thrives, regardless of what someone looks like. That's not complicated. But somewhere along the way we made it complicated, turned it into an industry where credentials don't matter, only the right vocabulary and the right politics. That's how you get Keishas. People who can talk the talk, but have no idea how to walk the walk, and leave destruction in their wake, while claiming to be the solution. Anyway, that's the story of how our HR director
hired an unqualified consultant.
Based on social media presence and passionate posts, without checking credentials or track record. The consultant implemented initiatives based on ideology, not evidence. Created division instead of inclusion. Made everyone afraid to speak or collaborate. Crashed productivity and morale. Cost us $2 million and multiple employees. Until leadership finally investigated. Found she'd misrepresented her qualifications. Terminated her and reset everything. The company recovered and got stronger by focusing on practical inclusion, not performative guilt. Good intentions aren't enough. Competence matters. Evidence matters. Results matter. Otherwise, you're just paying someone to make things worse while feeling good about trying. That's not equity. That's expensive failure. With better marketing,